Good evening. Welcome to Regent University. We're thrilled that you're here for our grand finale of the Big Read. And I want to just start this session by sharing a little bit of information about this project with you. And then we will turn it over to our very exciting expert on Russian literature and Tolstoy. So before I turn it over, I do want to share with you some information about the Big Read project. And that's working. The Big Read is an initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. And the design behind the program is to restore reading to the center of American life. And it's a program designed to help people who wouldn't ordinarily read the classics and wouldn't ordinarily read literature have access to these resources through diverse programming. And Regent University is thrilled that we won one of the Big Read grants last year through the NEA. And one of the challenges that we had was really to work with members of the community to bring the novel that we chose to the community. And we did choose The Death of Ivan Ilyich. We ended up having 10 community partners, and I'd like to share those with you. If you are from one of our community partners, please stand so that we can recognize you, and just stay standing, and I'll call out all the partners, and just stay standing until we're through with that. So we had 4 local high schools working with us: the International Baccalaureate Academy at Princess Anne High School, the International Baccalaureate Academy at Oscar Smith High School, the Global Studies and World Languages at Tallwood High School. Oh, there's one. Yes. Thank you for standing. Norview High School in Norfolk. We also had 3 university partners. Okay, I'll trust this eventually. We had the Joint Forces Staff College, the Ike Skelton Library, and the Russian Department at Old Dominion. I know we have a few folks from that department to stand. I see your professor waving at you to stand. Thank you. We had 2 community organizations, the St. Nicholas Greek Orthodox Church and Jewish Family Services. And I know we have someone from Jewish Family Services as well. And then we had 13 inmates from the Virginia Beach Correctional Center. They're not here tonight, but they did read the book. And I promise you, I was there today, and they were really amazing. What they got out of this book was really wonderful. So we worked with these 10 partners as well as friends of ours here at Regent University. And we sent over 1,000 copies of the book, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, all over the country and the world. We sent it to students, we sent it to alums, we sent it to folks at our partner institutions. Several alums at the partner institutions were instrumental in joining us on this project. We even had a student in Bermuda. Oh, I didn't write that down. An undergraduate distance learning student in Bermuda who taught the book to her Sunday school class. We have a Girl Scout troop here locally that read the book. Is the Girl Scout troop here? Do I see Girl Scouts? Stand up. Yay. Thank you. So we're really excited that we were able, as a university, as Regent University, to do something exciting for the community and something so important as sharing literature and sharing some of the important messages that are in this book. We did have to, as part of the grant, have diverse programming available to all of our partners. We had a kickoff reception with authentic Russian cuisine. I hope that some of you were able to come to that. We also had book discussion groups at all of our partner sites. We had a book discussion group here on campus as well, and the high schools had their own discussion groups. And as I mentioned earlier, we had a discussion group today at the Virginia Beach Correctional Center. We also had a Russian film festival called War, Love, and Repentance. And I'd like to especially thank Dr. Bounds and Dr. Quick, who's here with us tonight from the Communication School. They facilitated those sessions for us. And On Friday, 3 Friday nights in a row, we had between 45 and 50 people come and watch these films and read the subtitles and hear about the themes of these films. So it was a really wonderful experience. And then we've had 2 book discussions in Russian. To round out our programming here on campus, we had a faculty lunch symposium with several faculty members who presented different aspects of the life of Ivan Ilyich. Dr. Kaufman, who you will hear from in a few minutes, visited several of our partner sites and interacted personally with high school students there. So they got to experience not only an expert in Russian literature, but a college professor right on their high school campuses. Today on campus, we had a taste of Russia at the Ordinary. I'm not sure if our borscht looked like this picture, but that's what borscht. They did serve borscht today. We also had an exciting essay and video contest, and we're thrilled that the winners of those contests will be announced a little bit later tonight. And of course, this is our grand finale event with Dr. Kaufman. So we're just thrilled that you're here. We're glad that you participated in the Big Read. This was the first federal grant that the library received, and we are excited about this opportunity and hope to do this again in the near future. So stay tuned to Regent University Library and Common Reads from the future. I'd like to now turn the podium over to the director of the Big Read. Harold Henkel is the coordinator of this project. He is also an assistant librarian here, and he will introduce Dr. Kaufman.
Russian literature and language expert, author, and actor Dr. Andrew D. Kaufman, aka Professor Andy, has been bringing alive the Russian classics to Americans for over 15 years. Currently a lecturer at the University of Virginia, he has also taught at the University of California, at Berkeley Extension, and at Stanford University, where he received his PhD in Slavic languages and literatures and was a recipient of the Centennial Teaching Award. Co-author of Russian for Dummies and Russian Phrases for Dummies, Dr. Kaufman was a featured Russian literature expert for Oprah's Book Club and has discussed Russian literature and culture on national television and talk radio in the US and Russia. An internationally recognized Tolstoy scholar, Dr. Kaufman has received invitations to speak at the Gorky Institute of World Literature in Moscow and at the Tolstoy Museum and Estate in Yasnaya Polyana. Macmillan Publishing invited him to contribute an entry on War and Peace to their International Encyclopedia of Social Sciences, 2nd edition. The National Endowment for the Arts asked him to write the Reader's Guide to Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and colleges and communities across the United States have invited him to give lectures and workshops. He is currently completing Understanding Tolstoy, The Little Green Stick and the Lost House, an introduction to Tolstoy's art and its relevance to our times, scheduled to appear in 2010 in honor of the centennial of the writer's death. Pyotr Palyevsky, editor of the Complete Collected Works of Tolstoy, published by the Russian Academy of Sciences, calls Dr. Kaufman one of the first American scholars I know of in a generation to hear Tolstoy's voice. A fluent speaker of Russian, Dr. Kaufman has lived extensively in Russia, where he studied at Moscow State University from 1989 to 1990. He has also worked as an interpreter, translator, and management consultant throughout Russia. And we are delighted that Dr. Kaufman accepted our invitation to participate in our Big Read, and that he could be with us to illuminate Tolstoy's art.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harold. So as I was walking outside, I noticed Dr. Robertson's picture, and it struck me that this is multiculturalism at work. Here, a nice Jewish boy has come to a premier Christian university to talk about a Russian writer that was excommunicated from the church. That's multiculturalism. I want to congratulate you, first of all, on your community. You selected a challenging work on many levels, and what you've done here to bring together various organizations is really incredible. And this is exactly what the Big Read was intended to do. And in particular, I'd like to thank Harold Henkel, whose love of Russia partly was actually very instrumental in creating this choice of books, and he's been directing the whole logistics. Sarah Barron, who has been traveling around with me to schools and to jails as well today, and Dr. Carlos Campo, who's also been very central in putting this together. So I'd like to talk for about 30 or 35 minutes or so, and then this is a small enough group. I hope we can have a conversation, maybe even a debate. I really look forward to that. And I'd like to begin by taking you back to the 1890s, but not to Russia, to a small provincial town in South Africa called Natal. Because there was a young man living there in his early 20s. And like many young men and women, he was searching for answers to questions about what he wanted to do with his life, what kind of a profession he wanted, how he was going to help make the world a better place. But unlike a lot of young men and women that age, this particular gentleman, being a dark-skinned Hindu living in white-dominated South Africa, had firsthand exposure to racism and bigotry. They were a part of his everyday experience. He was traveling on a business trip once to go to Johannesburg, and he had bought a first-class ticket on a train, and the conductor came by and said, "You've got to move to the third class, you're not white." And he refused, and he was kicked off the train. And he spent the next several hours until 3 in the morning in a train station in the middle of the mountains, shivering. And at 3 in the morning, a stagecoach came along and agreed to take him further. Later that day, the stagecoach driver asked him to sit on the floorboards in order to make way for a European passenger that had just boarded. And he refused, and the driver beat him physically. Hotels and restaurants refused him service along the way. And when he finally got to his destination, the magistrate of the court asked him to remove the turban from his head, which was for him a sign of his spiritual faith, and he refused. And needless to say, this was the beginning of the end of his career as a young attorney. It wasn't long after this that this young man was given a book to read. And that book was called The Kingdom of God is Within You by Leo Tolstoy. Now, Tolstoy at this point had already been known as the author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He was an international celebrity, to many a spiritual prophet. And The Kingdom of God is Within You is one of the most harrowing exposés of the injustices and hypocrisies of modern society and modern governments in particular. But it is also one of the most inspiring visions of the possibility of social change, but a change that comes about not by manipulating the tools of social and political and economic power, but rather by drawing on a different kind of power, the power of the divine spirit, which Tolstoy believes resides inside of every human being. So you see, this book lit a fire inside this young man because it gave him what he needed when he needed it. And that fire would continue to grow over the years as these ideas would develop in him. And that fire would spread eventually to other cities in South Africa where he would go and set up experimental communities based on some of Tolstoy's ideas. And that fire would spread eventually to India, where he went back home. And eventually in the 1920s and 1930s, that fire spread to a nation of millions of Indians, because the young man who read The Kingdom of God is Within You at the age of 25 is, of course, the future Mahatma Gandhi. The reason I begin with this story is not to belabor the obvious point that Tolstoy was a great writer, but to remind contemporary audiences of something we sometimes forget in our age of computers and internet, that books can and do change people's lives. And Tolstoy is an example of one of those writers about whom you could say, in fact, he changed the course of modern civilization through his writing. Gandhi wasn't the only one. In the second half of the 19th century, people came from all over the world to Tolstoy's estate at Yasny Polyana. People wrote him letters asking him for advice on everything from religion and morality to how to be a good vegetarian, which was one of Tolstoy's projects at that time in his life. One of the people who came to Yasny Polyana was a young American by the name of Ernest Crosby. Not so young, he was 40 years old. And this young man was serving as a diplomat in Egypt at the time. And he had read Tolstoy's book called On Life, and it transformed him. He quit his job. In fact, he quit his entire profession, and he dedicated the next 20 years of his life to teaching and lecturing and writing about Tolstoy, much, by the way, to his father's chagrin, because his father did not want him to spend his time doing this, but he did it anyway. In the second half of the 19th century, it was often said that there were two czars in Russia, Tsar Nicholas II and Leo Tolstoy. And of the two, Tolstoy was the more respected. Lenin called Tolstoy the mirror of the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks found inspiration in Tolstoy. Martin Luther King was deeply moved by Tolstoy. Ernest Hemingway said that of all the writers he wanted to get into a boxing rink with, a literary boxing rink, Tolstoy was the one he wanted to emulate as a writer. Even Condoleezza Rice has said that War and Peace is her favorite book. Now, when I'm in some non-Republican audiences, the comment often is, well, she obviously only read the war sections of the book. And Oprah, of course, chose Anna Karenina as her summer reading in 2004 or 5. I can't remember. So what is it about this guy? What is it about Tolstoy that's made him have such an impact on so many people from so many different walks of life? Well, the answers to this question are as varied as the people he's affected. And in my own life, in fact, the answers have changed over the years. But tonight I'd like to suggest one possible answer to this question. And I'd like to do so by quoting Tolstoy. Tolstoy said, "The goal of the artist is not to solve a question irrefutably, but to force people to love life in all of its innumerable and inexhaustible manifestations." The goal of the artist is not to solve a question irrefutably, but to force people to love life in all of its manifestations. You see, the greatest contribution that Tolstoy wanted to make as an artist is not the answers that he gives, and he gave many, but rather the attitude towards life that he inspired. He wanted his readers to have such an appreciation of the grandeur of the universe, of the totality of life, that they would be inspired to want to go out and seek out the answers for themselves. And Tolstoy is one of those writers that poses the biggest questions of all. Not little questions, big questions. The most important questions that are often the ones that get swept under the rug the older we get. And then they come back again when we're in our 60s and 70s. Why are we here? What is the purpose of our existence? Is there any meaning to my life that will not be destroyed by my death? That's a quote from Tolstoy. And I can tell you that my personal interest in Tolstoy started with some of these questions. Now, I was a freshman in college, and I probably should have been out playing beer pong and socializing with people, but instead, I was confused. I was 19 years old. I just moved from Michigan to the East Coast, entirely new environment. I was kind of like a country bumpkin from West Michigan in this sophisticated East Coast culture, and I didn't know how to fit in, and I wasn't sure about what I wanted to major in and what career I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, I decided to drop in a course on 19th century Russian literature. And one of the first books we had to read, I would never do this as a professor, but one of the first books was War and Peace. It was huge. I went to the bookstore. I mean, this thing was terrifying. And as I started reading, the first thing that amazed me is how incredibly real this world is. Every sound, every smell, every gesture, it's like you're reading a slice of life. But even more importantly, or equally importantly at that time, was the characters were grappling with the very questions that I was grappling with. So in a sense, Tolstoy became kind of like inexpensive, cheap therapy for me, personal therapy. But this passion, this interest in these questions, and the questions that Tolstoy grapples with and his characters grapple with, that grew over the years, obviously, because I eventually went on to graduate school and have continued to teach Tolstoy. And that is the spirit in which I talk about Tolstoy. I try to teach Tolstoy. Tolstoy once said something that you would never hear a writer in today's world say. He said, "The hero of my tale is truth," with a capital T. Actually, he said, it's at the end of his story, Sevastopol in May, "The hero of my tale, whom I love with all the power of my soul, whom I have tried to portray in all of its beauty, is truth," with a capital T. Can you imagine a writer, especially a young writer in today's world, writing a sentence like that without an ironic wink or a kind of mocking smile? But you see, Tolstoy believed with every fiber of his being that there is such a truth out there with a capital T, even if it always remains just beyond his grasp. That quest for this truth, for this understanding of the ultimate purpose of our existence, this was the journey of Tolstoy's life as a man and as an artist. And the reason he would have loved the big read is because that's exactly why he wrote books, so that people like you and me would get together and talk about them and say, God, maybe there's something from this book that I can take for my own life. Tolstoy measured his worth as a writer not by what he contributed to the field of literature, but rather by what he contributed to people's lives. So there are two images, two landmarks in Tolstoy's life, both of which are at Yasnaya Polyana, his home estate, which encapsulate for me the essence of Tolstoy. And they're the little green stick and the lost house, the title of my book. Yasnaya Polyana is the 1,000-acre estate which Tolstoy inherited. He spent 60 of his 82 years there. It is a landscape of sprawling meadows and fields and ravines and forests. And this is where Tolstoy lived. This is how he grew up. You get a sense when you're walking at Yasnaya Polyana how a guy like this, living in this environment, could write a book like War and Peace, because his very physical environment seemed limitless. And to this day, Yasnaya Polyana is a kind of Mecca. It is said that there are 3 cultural centers in Russia today: Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Yasnaya Polyana. People still come to Yasnaya Polyana from all over Russia and all over the world. As you're walking along one of the paths, one of the many dirt paths at Yasnaya Polyana, you go along about 400 or 500 meters, and the trees start getting thicker, and you smell the elm and the oak and the linden trees and the wildflowers. And as you go a little further, the air gets a little bit cooler and it gets a little bit darker. And you come out into an opening, and you're on the edge of a ravine. And there's a very small field of grass. In the middle of that small field of grass is a raised mound of grass that just stands there. That's Tolstoy's grave. And that is exactly how he wanted it to appear after his death, without a headstone, without a sign. And that is the spot that he wanted it to appear on, precisely on that spot, because when he was a little boy, he used to play with his brother in the ravine in that little spot, and one day they found a little green stick. And they used to pretend that on that stick was inscribed the secret to universal happiness. And this is what Tolstoy wrote when he was 76 years old. And just as I believed then that there is a little green stick on which is written the secret that will destroy all evil in people and give them great blessings, so now I believe that such a truth exists and that it will be revealed to people and will give them what it promises. A 76-year-old man still believing in this childlike ideal. And that's all the more impressive with Tolstoy, because this is a guy who understood just how imperfect people are. Because the other image at Yasnaya Polyana is on a different part of the estate, more central. And as you go back, you see there's a field, about a large unkempt kind of garden about half the size of this room. And at your feet, on one edge of the garden, is a little stone. And on that stone is written the words, "Here stood the house in which Leo Tolstoy was born." So where's that house? Well, Tolstoy lost it in a gambling bet when he was 27 years old. The guy literally came up. I don't remember where he lived. He came up with his horse and his tractor and carted the house away. And to this day, they don't know, because Tolstoy didn't have enough cash to pay off his collateral. And believe me, if people knew where that house was, you would know about it. Scholars have unearthed every little detail of Tolstoy's life, but it's literally lost. This is what Tolstoy wrote in his diary the day that happened. "I'm so disgusted with myself that I'd like to forget about my existence." So what he did is he started to create rules of behavior for himself, like Benjamin Franklin, who was one of his models. So in his diary, he would have 6, 7, 8, 10 rules of behavior and morality, and this is what I'm going to do today, and this is what I'm not going to do today, and he would grade himself every day. His grades were not very good. 2 weeks later, he wrote, "Played cards again and lost another 200 rubles. I can't promise to stop." So he continued to gamble and to drink and to carouse and to sleep with gypsy women, and he got one of his peasant girls on his estate pregnant. Tolstoy's the father of an illegitimate child. And this was his life in his 20s. At 25, this is what he wrote, "I must have a woman Sensuality doesn't give me a moment's peace. His sexual appetites were pathological. At the age of 30, sensuality torments me. Laziness, again, boredom and sadness. Everything seems stupid. The ideal is unattainable. I've already ruined myself. 30 years old. The unattainable ideal, the ruined self, these aren't usually the images that you associate with the man who later on would inspire Mahatma Gandhi and found his own religion based on his interpretation of the Gospels and become a spiritual prophet to many. And yet Tolstoy wouldn't be Tolstoy if it weren't the union and the constant conflict between these two. So the little green stick and the lost house, not 500 meters separate these two landmarks at Tolstoy's estate, and yet his entire life was spent traveling a path back and forth between them, between who he was and who he was continually striving to become. Tolstoy's characters are a reflection of that very quest. One of the reasons that Tolstoy's novels are so long is because it was important for Tolstoy to show the length of the human journey. His characters are searching and seeking and struggling and suffering and hitting dead ends, and yet they're also experiencing some of the most incredible moments of bliss in all of world literature. One of my favorite characters, and the one that I most associated with when I was a freshman in college, is Pierre Bezukhov, one of the heroes of War and Peace. Just curious, who's read War and Peace? That's impressive. Usually 0 hands go up. Pierre is a big-hearted, bespectacled, slightly overweight idealist when the novel begins. And maybe that's why I liked him, because I was all those things too when I was 20 years old. And so the novel begins, and he's come back from Europe. He's spent 5 years there getting educated, as many aristocrats did. And he receives an inheritance, and now he's got the second largest fortune in Russia. And everybody wants to be Pierre's friend. And because Pierre is such a big-hearted guy, he wants to be everyone's friend, and he wants to please everyone. So Vasily Kuragin manipulates him into marrying his beautiful daughter, Helen. And the reader knows this is a disaster. Pierre doesn't love Helen. She doesn't love him. They get divorced, obviously. And then when Pierre is in one of his many moments of depression, he meets a Freemason, Bazdiev. This is a kind of spirituality peddler back then. Freemasonry was very popular. And Bazdiev says, well, if you become a Freemason, you will discover the ideal. You will discover the universal brotherhood of man, which you're looking for. So Pierre doesn't just become a Freemason. He becomes the best Freemason that there is. He starts to give talks, and he starts to rise the ranks of Freemasonry. He frees his peasants under the influence of Freemasonry. And he's walking around his estate thinking, God, how easy it is to do so much good in the world. And yet his peasants are fleecing him. They're taking advantage of him. They're stealing from him. But he doesn't see any of this. He falls in love with Natasha. The only problem is Natasha is betrothed to his best friend, Andrei. And then Napoleon enters Russia, and Pierre decides he wants to see what battle is like. So he goes to the battlefield, and there's Pierre in his white summer hat with bullets flying all around him. And the soldiers are like, what is this guy doing here? But they like him. He's a good guy. And then he returns to Moscow, and then he decides he wants to become the savior of Russia. So he's going to assassinate Napoleon. So on his way to saving Russia, instead he saves a young girl from a fire, and then he saves an Armenian woman who's being arrested by a French soldier. And the French soldier thinks that Pierre is a spy, so he arrests him, and now Pierre is a prisoner of war. And for the next 6 weeks, he's marching as a prisoner of war. And one day he's called, after all of this, one day he's called to the firing squad. Pierre's going to be executed. Well, actually, he thinks he's going to be executed. He's just been called to witness an execution. And he witnesses that execution. And his entire world is shattered again. His entire world, his sense of purpose has fallen apart. How is it that that men can kill other men like that? What is this force? And when he is in that position, he's thrown into a shed, and he meets the wise old peasant Platon Karatayev. Platon gives him a potato. And never in Pierre's life has he ever tasted anything more delicious. You see, in that moment, after all of that journeying and traveling, when Pierre has been stripped of everything, of his possessions, of his money, of his power, of his clothes, his strength, his very sense of meaning, when he's been stripped of everything, he discovers something that he hadn't understood before. In all of his searching, he discovered the sheer joy and beauty of simply being alive. In that moment, he discovers that, he glimpses that Tolstoyan truth, that Tolstoyan truth with a capital T, and he realizes it's right here, right now, in this moment. It's all around him. It's within him. In that moment, he discovers the peace of War and Peace, which is not just the absence of war, but it's that tranquility that all of us seek amid the chaos of life. But you see, if Pierre were told that all he had to do to get that revelation was simply to follow what the Freemasonry told him to do, or the path that had been laid out by his father, or the dictates of society, if this is all he had to do, or read a self-help book, or go on Dr. Phil, or read or listen to Oprah, both of whom I love, but this would have cheapened his discovery. What makes that discovery so profound and compelling is how hard and how long he had to struggle in order to achieve it. Pierre has to go through the war in order to find his peace. And here I'd like to suggest a second definition of the word that's translated as peace in War and Peace. The word is mir. In Russian, it also means world, cosmos, war and the world. Perhaps all of our life is a necessary battle. Not just the battle that takes place out there between peoples and nations and in society, but for Tolstoy, even more importantly, the battle that takes place in here, between who we are and who we are continually striving to become. But something happens with Tolstoy's art. Something happens with Tolstoy's characters over the next 30 years. Because Tolstoy will write the death of Ivan Ilyich about 30 years later. And if War and Peace is this giant celebration of everything that is in the world, then the death of Ivan Ilyich is more like a taut string ready to snap. Or as one critic put it, if, the young Tolstoy saw all of life like a giant glittering ballroom, and the late Tolstoy saw only Ivan's narrow black bag. And there's something to that. See, because Ivan doesn't ask any of the questions that Pierre was asking. He's not searching for any kind of truth. Tolstoy writes, Ivan Ilyich's life was most simple and ordinary and therefore most terrible. It's not that Tolstoy had anything against ordinariness. Actually, that moment when Pierre eats the potato is quite ordinary. But it's also extraordinary. Ivan never reaches that level. He's a kind of spiritual zombie. He's on autopilot. He does what he's supposed to do. He goes to law school like his father, and he gets a job, and he rises the ranks, and he makes a little bit more money, and he gets a house, and then he picks up a wife along the way. Not exactly because he loved her, and not exactly because she was a good social fit, but some combination of those two considerations. And of course, he gets a bigger house, and he's hanging his curtains in his house, or showing the upholsterer how to hang the curtains, and he has a little fall, and he laughs it off. Ha, 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 good thing I'm an athletic man, he says. And then a short time after that, he starts to get this pain in his side, and the pain gets a little worse, and he goes to the doctor, and the doctor does this brilliant analysis. Well, on the one hand, it might be this. On the other hand, it might be that. On the third hand, it might be this. But all Ivan wants to know is it serious or not, doc? And of course, it is serious. He's dying. And he can't grasp that concept. What is wrong with Ivan, by the way? What is his illness? Sarah Barron and I had this conversation over dinner last week. We also talked about tennis and other things too, so don't worry, it wasn't that depressing of a dinner. But most readers assume what Ivan assumes, that the cause of his death was the fall that he had from the ladder. But you see, Tolstoy never tells us that. Tolstoy doesn't make it that easy on us. He forces us as readers to grapple alongside of Ivan with the strangeness of this event that he is confronting. It's an event beyond all explanations, all labels, all causality. Ivan tries in vain to put a label on this experience, which he just can't conceptualize until this moment. Suddenly the matter presented itself in quite a different aspect. Veriform appendix, kidney, he said to himself. It's not a question of my appendix. or my kidney, but of life and death. Yes, life was there, and now it's going, and I can't stop it. There was light, and now there's darkness. I was here, and now I'm going there. Where? A chill came over him. His breathing ceased, and he felt only the throbbing of his heart. Where are we going? Where did we come from? These are unanswerable questions that haunted Tolstoy, and now Ivan's got to confront them himself. We can take our medicine. We can listen to the doctor's diagnoses. We can read the philosophers and the theologians. We can watch Dr. Sanjay Gupta on TV, who I think is our Surgeon General now. But in the end, each one of us has to confront these big questions on our own. We have to confront that it on our own. To save himself from this condition, Ivan looked for consolations, new screens. And they were found and for a while seemed to save him, but then they immediately fell to pieces, or rather became transparent, as if it penetrated them and nothing could veil it. And Tolstoy keeps repeating this word, it. In Russian, it is an interesting word. It also means she. And Tolstoy knew he was playing with this double meaning. Because what Ivan is confronted with now is both the most impersonal, universal experience and also the most intimate relationship of his life. And death is a demanding, irascible partner. And this is one relationship partner he can't manage. It incessantly nags and gnaws at him, kind of like his wife. But unlike his wife, it won't stay at home when he goes out to play bridge. It's not impressed with his job title or his pretty curtains. So Ivan becomes like a drug addict going through withdrawal. As the comfortable numbness of his existence starts to fall away, he is left with the pain not only of his physically decaying flesh, but of a slowly awakening consciousness. He's coming face to face with a new question that he never even knew existed. Not what's next, how do I get from A to B, how do I get a better house or a promotion or a better job. Not what's next, but what's first. What's most important in my life? Given that I'm going to die, how should I spend my time on this earth? That's not an abstract question to Tolstoy. That was the most fundamental, practical question that every human being can ask. Tolstoy asked it this way in his confession: is there any meaning to my life that will not be destroyed by my death? And Tolstoy believed if there is any meaning in our lives that will not be destroyed by our death, it has to lie in that aspect of our being that is indestructible. And for Tolstoy, that was our spiritual being. And the greatest manifestation of our spiritual being on earth, he believed, was through acts of love and compassion. And this is precisely what Ivan does at the end. When he pities his son, he has asked to have his son sent away. This is perhaps the first truly selfless act of Ivan's life. He goes through, most scholars agree that he goes through some kind of a spiritual conversion, a Christian conversion. But I will tell you, I think that's the least persuasive part of the novella. For me, much more believable are the pain and the torment that Tolstoy describes. These are developed excruciatingly well by the master artist. I'm not convinced that Tolstoy was convinced that Ivan actually found his answer. But what I am convinced of after reading this novella is that Tolstoy was still searching like hell for it. But what would Tolstoy have us do then? Is Ivan's life really that evil? What's wrong with playing bridge and wanting a comfortable house and going to work and wanting the things that all of us want, a comfortable life? And how do we realize this ideal of absolute compassion, of complete selflessness that Tolstoy strove for in his life? He couldn't do it himself. Tolstoy was a towering egoist. Even as he was preaching these ideals, he was tormenting his wife. He ran away from home at 82. He left his wife a note. Sorry, we're on different paths. It's not going to work out. He renounced his copyright on all of everything published before 1881. His wife almost committed suicide. She said, "How can you do this? You're denying your children an honorable income? Is that compassion? Last summer, when I was at Yasna Polyana, I spoke with Ilyich Tolstoy, the great-great-grandson of Tolstoy, and he said this is still a sore point in the Tolstoy family. And finally, how do we make death a constant part of our consciousness? How do we walk around constantly aware of the fact that we're dying? I tried this exercise in classes. I asked students and audiences to imagine they have 6 months to live. People can't do that. I tried it. I go to my head. I get intellectual. I can't do that. Ivan, in fact, is even more terrified by the thought of death. He's as terrified by the thought of death as by his actual death. So as I'm going through this internal dialogue, I have more fights with Tolstoy than I do with my girlfriend. That's actually kind of interesting. So as I'm going through this internal fight with myself about well, how do we realize this ideal that Tolstoy is putting out there, I had a student come to me after class, and she said, you know, I think this is a really powerful work. And I said, why do you think it's powerful? She said, because when I was in high school, I was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. And I winced, and I thought, geez, did I open a Pandora's box here? And I said, what's that like? And this is somebody who's younger than me. She said, well, actually, you don't change that much. I mean, you go about your ordinary life, but it does make you think about stuff. I guess it's funny, too. Ivan Ilyich is a very funny book, on top of everything else. So in the end, I think maybe this is the greatest thing that Tolstoy can give us. He makes us think about stuff. He makes us pay attention a little bit more, see the world through a slightly widened lens, try to be a little more authentic, a little kinder, a little more compassionate. 5 more minutes. There are those in Russia today who believe that Tolstoy is still too optimistic about human beings. There are Christians in Russia who hate Tolstoy. He was excommunicated from the church. We can talk about that. But there was an article written about 10 years ago, and the argument was, what did Tolstoy understand about 20th century life? What did he know about World War I or World War II or Hitler or Stalin or the Holocaust? He can't relate to the terrors and the horrors of modern life. He lived in a different time. Well, in response to that question, a friend of mine wrote an answer. Now, let me tell you very briefly about this friend of mine. He was in his 70s at the time when he wrote this answer. When he was 18 years old, he wrote a poem making fun of Stalin. This was in the 1940s. The authorities found him out, arrested him, and he spent the next 10 years of his life in a prison camp. So here's a guy who knew something about the horrors of 20th century life. And what he said is, if there ever were a writer who understands the lies that we tell ourselves, the brutality that human beings exhibit, it's Tolstoy. And yet if there ever were a writer who, knowing this full well, still believed in human possibility, it's also Tolstoy. Tolstoy himself responded to this criticism of being too idealistic in his own time. And the kingdom of God is within you. He used the image of a river. He said, look, if you want to get to the other side of a fast-flowing river, are you just going to swim right across? No. You're going to swim upstream. So then maybe you'll get to your destination. I think what Tolstoy meant by that is that there are so many forces in our lives which conspire against not only our achieving our ideals, but even having ideals. That if we don't fight extra hard for them, we're likely to be carried so far downstream by that current of complacency that we might forget the destination we wanted to arrive at in the first place. To the young man who wants to grow up in today's world to become an artist, the world often says, get real, stop dreaming, get practical. To the young Ernest Crosby, who gave up his entire profession to dedicate himself to Tolstoy, the world, in the voice of his father, said, why would you do something like that? To the young Mahatma Gandhi, the world said, hostility and divisiveness and a struggle for power are the ways of life. Accept it. But Gandhi wouldn't accept it nor would Crosby. And to them and to all of us, Tolstoy says, and you don't accept it either. You keep fighting for your ideals. You keep striving towards that positive vision. You keep asking the big questions. You keep swimming upstream, because then maybe, just maybe, you'll have a chance to reach the other side. The goal of the artist is not to solve a question irrefutably, but to force people to love life in all of its manifestations. Tolstoy continued. He said, if I were told that I could write a work in which I would resolve all of the social questions of the day, I wouldn't spend 2 hours on such a work. But if I knew that what I write will be read by the children of today in 20 years, and that they will laugh and weep and fall in love with life because of it, then I dedicate all of my time and all of my energy to such a work. As we continue to laugh and to weep and to have a deeper appreciation of life because of Tolstoy's extraordinary art, nearly 150 years after he wrote those words, I think we can all be grateful that he had the courage to choose the path that he did. And as the centennial of Tolstoy's death approaches next year in 2010, we have a wonderful opportunity to revisit this writer. So your official journey with Tolstoy is coming to an end, but I hope that your unofficial journey with him will continue. And even more importantly than thinking about Tolstoy, I hope you'll think with Tolstoy about the issues that are as relevant in your lives as they were in 19th century Russia. Because perhaps the greatest way that we can express our gratitude to Tolstoy for his courage is by finding the courage within ourselves to reconnect with what's truly most important in our own lives. Thank you. Thank you.
We would like to open the floor now for questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand and we will bring the mic to you.
Thank you for an excellent lecture. My question has to do with the continuing legacy of Tolstoy for Russia. And to get at it more precisely, I'll draw a comparison to an American author, Mark Twain. If you read Huckleberry Finn, you're immersed in the life of the river, you're immersed in the life of 19th century mid-America. But of course, the legacy is that we still see something about slavery, racism, and so on. So what, for somebody who's not familiar, as you are, with Russian society, what is it that a Russian would read in either this piece or War and Peace or Anna Karenina that would say, this is us?
Great question. War and Peace continues to be, in the Russian imagination, the great Russian epic, the great story of Russia's defeat of Napoleon during 1812, and how all of Russian society came together as a unified whole, not just physically, but spiritually, and defeated this Western force. And ironically also kind of absorbed Napoleon. So Napoleon and French culture become almost a part of a much bigger Russian psyche. Tolstoy to this, let me respond about Anna Karenina. Of all of Tolstoy's works, I think that is the one that is probably most read right now, because it takes place in the 1870s when Russia was going through a major transformation. It was a transition to capitalism, to not as we understand it, but Tsar Alexander II had loosened, had created the great reforms. So all of Russian society was confused about what they were supposed to believe. Well, this is precisely what Russians have been going through for the past 15 years as they made their transition from a dysfunctional socialism to some version of capitalism, and there's a giant void. And so a lot of people can relate to what's going on in Anna Karenina. And there was also the sexual revolution in the 1990s in Russia. So that raised a lot of questions about relationships between men and women and sexual freedom. Let me just say one more thing. I was at Jasny Polyana and we had an intergenerational debate. There were high school students who were saying Tolstoy, they don't understand how Tolstoy is relevant to them anymore, and the adults were vehemently trying to persuade them. And I was just sitting there. I was supposed to give a lecture, but I asked a question and I just let them go at it, and it was fascinating. But I think the younger generation finally conceded that, yeah, a lot of what Tolstoy writes about is still relevant today.
I wonder if you would comment on whether you think and to what degree Tolstoy ever resolved his fear of death, and that if he ever really came to a point where he felt there was a resurrection, quoting his last book.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think he was seeking up to the very end. His death was tragic. He left home. He wrote a note to his wife. People think he was trying to escape to a monastery. But he was trying to withdraw from the world. Remember, this is the most famous Russian alive in that time. And he was trying to transcend his self. It's very hard to transcend the limitations of yourself when all of the world is so fascinated with you. And he struggled with this. And I don't think he ever resolved it. But what's interesting to me about Tolstoy is the search itself.
How much do you think the Russian Orthodox Church affected his writing? And he seems to be very interested in this trend of Russian mysticism. You mentioned the Freemasons. That sounds interesting. Was that important to him?
Freemasonry, he didn't buy into. He thought it was kind of a cult. But he grew up as a Christian. He grew up in the Christian Orthodox Church, and he struggled with God his whole life. Maxim Gorky said that the relations between Tolstoy and God remind him of the legend of two bears in one den. Tolstoy, at the end of his life, essentially believed that the church had perverted the message, the teachings of Christ. And resurrection, in addition to being a story of a resurrection, is also a scathing attack on the church. There's depictions of priests in there who, according to Tolstoy, don't believe one whit in the teachings of Jesus. They're simply in their post because they like the power, they like the money that they're receiving so their children can go to school. And obviously, the church didn't like that. And the novel was banned and he was excommunicated. By the way, Tolstoy wrote his own Gospels, his own version of the Gospels, because he thought the Gospels could be improved upon. So he got rid of all the mysteries and all the esoteric elements, and he rewrote them so that he thought that they were more understandable. I mean, that's the kind of ego that this guy had. And one more thing on that, I was last summer I was talking to a gentleman, a pretty distinguished scholar, and he said, I couldn't believe it. I spit on Tolstoy. Tolstoy was a great writer, but he was a lousy Christian. An article was not published about Tolstoy's religious views for fear of upsetting the Orthodox community. Such are the passions that are still aroused by Tolstoy's religious views. I'm actually not watching. I'm sorry when hands go up.
I was interested in your comment about teenagers finding Tolstoy relevant because he was a guide for me. When I was 16, I stumbled onto Tolstoy and I started with War and Peace. And intertwined with that search was a lot of Dostoevsky. And I kept thinking, Dostoevsky asks all the good questions. And then I read Anna, and I felt like, and here's a great answer. And I had shared this during the movie that we watched, Anna Karenina, but there was such a confrontation between a living God and a seeking soul that Levin displayed, I think, in Anna. And I've always felt like Anna was a character secondary to what Levin's search was. But I'm wondering if you could comment on the fact that I was confronted with, that when Tolstoy went off on this search when he was 82, it reminded me so much at the end of the Brothers Karamazov when Alyosha was set free to go on his spiritual journey. Do you see any parallels between that?
The last book that Tolstoy was reading before he died was The Brothers Karamazov. And there is something Dostoevskian about the later Tolstoy in the sense of the intensity of that search. But in general, Tolstoy and Dostoevsky are considered like the sun and the moon of 19th century literature. They were contemporaries. They never actually met one another, although there was one point where they were in the same room together. But because Tolstoy was so frustrated with his celebrity, he told his secretary, "Do not introduce me to anyone." And his secretary said, "Well, there's someone here that wants," "No, I don't want to meet anyone." "Well, no, I don't." So he left and they never met. And Dostoevsky was furious about that because he wanted to meet Tolstoy. But in general, their vision of life, they dealt with the same issues, but their worldview, I think, was very different. In the end, I think Tolstoy believed that there is some kind of an ultimate harmony. There is some kind of a reconciliation, kind of a unifying truth. And he said, the problem with Dostoevsky is that it's all struggle. There's no reconciliation. And in Dostoevsky, you do feel the kind of the torment and the psych and the pressure of small spaces and living in the city, and that's often a metaphor for the psychological torment. Ivan Ilyich is close to that. It's probably Tolstoy's most Dostoevskian work. But in general, I think their worldviews were very different. And by the way, Dostoevsky is actually more popular right now in Russia because his issues, his portrayal of modernity seems to resonate right now with the craziness that's going on. And Tolstoy's notion of a truth with a capital T is not fashionable, but I'm trying to make it a little more fashionable. Yeah, you might not need a microphone. Tolstoy is best read with a bottle of vodka? He's best read with high depression and a bottle of vodka? Well, I wouldn't read The Death of Ivan Ilyich like that.
My question was, why is it that Tolstoy translates so well into modern day and other languages than to Chekhov, for example? Like The Cherry Orchard is my favorite play ever written, and it's a dark comedy, but for most people who read it in English, it's wholly depressing.
The problem, you mean reading it or seeing it performed? Reading it, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I can answer that question. I know in terms of performing Chekhov, it's incredibly difficult because there's a very fine balance between the comedy and the melancholy, and 99% of all the performances never strike that balance. They either turn Chekhov into a farce or they turn him into this bore. But Chekhov was not boring. There's some excellent translations. There's new translations of Tolstoy, of Anna Karenina, War and Peace just came out last year. And they're marvelous. And there's also some new translations of Chekhov. But as to why, I'm not sure why it's easier to translate the writing of Chekhov, because both of them were just as subtle. Your version of The Death of Ivan Ilyich was a little bit, was different from the Maud translation. The Maud translation is harsher, believe it or not. This is a slightly lighter version. There's kind of more of a comic quality. The Maud translation is just really intense. So it's a slightly different book. Yeah.
Are there translators that you prefer in the different forms of literature, say poetry? Tolstoy, Dostoevsky?
I love Pevere and Volokhonsky. They've translated Anna Karenina. In fact, their version of Anna Karenina became a bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, because Oprah selected it for her book club. They sold 800,000 copies within 6 months of Anna Karenina. I think that's the best translation. And it's a toss-up with respect to War and Peace. They just translated War and Peace, and it's a phenomenal translation, but the Maud translation is excellent too. And they both have their advantages. If you were to choose one, I'd go with the Volokhonsky and Pevere translation, because it's a little bit easier to read. The Maud translation feels a little bit like Victorian English. And the novel is very alive, very lively, and the Maud translation doesn't always capture that. Yeah.
Really appreciate you coming here and speaking tonight. Do I need it? Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, sir. My question was, you mentioned Benjamin Franklin in passing, and I know that Peter the Great and the whole Russian perception of the West was kind of iffy at best. Was there any Western influence writer in particular that Tolstoy may have drawn influence from?
Voltaire. Well, Tolstoy was an incredibly educated guy. He was one of the most educated men in 19th century Europe. He was well read in the Greek classics and the Roman classics and ancient modern literature and the spiritual traditions and the natural sciences. I mean, he was not only a graphomaniac, he was also a bibliophile. So his influences are vast and varied. But in terms of his moral influences, when he was young, he loved Benjamin Franklin's pragmatism. Tolstoy always wanted to be very morally pragmatic, which is why he modeled his diaries or his rules of behavior on Benjamin Franklin. But he loved, probably the single greatest influence, if I had to name one, is Rousseau. Man is born free and society corrupts him. That's fundamental to Tolstoy's belief. The problem with Ivan is that society ruined him. When he was a child, everything was fine, and then everything went downhill from there.
What sense you have for how he became cosmopolitan? How did he, without traveling, without leaving Russia, how did he become?
He traveled a lot. Yasnaya Polyana was his base camp. I mean, he said, without my Yasnaya, I can't understand Russia. But he was a wealthy aristocrat, and he traveled throughout. He traveled to Europe. He never made it to America. So he traveled quite a bit, but he always preferred Yasnaya Polyana because that was his cosmos. That was his place. And some people even argued that had Tolstoy spent more time outside of Yasnaya Polyana, he would have been less of an idealist, because he would have understood just how messed up things are in the city. But he did travel.
Thank you for your questions. And if you have questions that were not answered, please remember them. And in a few minutes when we break for a reception, you can ask Professor Andy directly your questions. And right now I'd like to ask Harold Henkel to approach the podium and talk a little bit about the contest that we had.
Thank you very much.
As part of our Big Read celebration of Tolstoy and the death of Ivan Ilyich, the library sponsored essay and video contests. For both contests, we had two divisions, one for readers 18 and under, and a second division for readers 19 and over. The quality of the submissions was extraordinarily high. The essay, I know that our judges had a very difficult time choosing winners, and I'd like to just thank all of our judges, Georgianne Bordner, B.J. Newman, and Carrie White for taking on this. It was a very difficult and time-consuming job to read and choose winners. To honor our winners now, we will read the top prize-winning essays and screen the winning video. The essay contest for both divisions was based on this prompt that one of the prompts suggested by the National Endowment for the Arts, and I will begin by reading that. Several times over the course of the novella, we find statements very much like this one. So that on the whole, Ivan Ilyич's life proceeded as he felt it should, pleasantly and properly. One's first instinctive reaction to such comments might be, well, what's wrong with that? What, according to Tolstoy, is wrong with that? And this is what our winner in the 18 and under contest wrote. What is wrong with Ivan Ilyич's life? Ivan Ilyич's life had been most simple and most commonplace and most horrifying. This quote directly informs the reader that something was wrong in Ivan Ilyич's life, but that maybe that error was not visible to the naked eye. On the outside, Ivan Ilyич's life seemed just as it should. He was married, he had 2 children, he had a good job, and his family had some money. Even Ivan Ilyich himself seemed nothing but content with his lifestyle. Nevertheless, there was undoubtedly something missing from his honorable life. Ivan Ilyich always needed people to approve of him. He did whatever he felt was appropriate for a man of his social standing. The main mistake he made because of this mindset was getting married, even though he had previously had no intention of doing so. He liked Praskovya Fyodorovna, but he certainly didn't love her. She fell in love with him, and since his acquaintances saw marriage as the appropriate thing to do, he thought, really, why shouldn't I get married? This arrangement seemed fine to Ivan Ilyich at first, but soon he changed his mind. He found himself searching desperately for ways to get out of spending time at home with his family. When he was forced to be at home, he often brought friends with him and played cards or stayed in his study. Ivan Ilyич's life was missing true love. Ivan Ilyич's life also lacked true meaning. While his job is a very important one, he does not do anything else worthwhile. He devotes himself to card games and gambles with his friends, but other than that, Ivan Ilyich does not do anything meaningful with his life. In a way, Ivan Ilyич's life is just like that game of whist. It is a simple social gathering after social gathering with appropriate moves to make and rules to be followed. Life for Ivan Ilyich is simply an opportunity to climb the social ladder. He has spent his entire life worrying about things that are frivolous and unnecessary. Ivan Ilyич's life has a moral to it for the novella's audience. When readers re-examine his life, they begin to find what Ivan Ilyich has finally realized. Life is too short to be lived without meaning. He asks himself, what if my entire life, my entire conscious life, was simply not the real thing? By this point, Ivan Ilyich has realized that he has wasted his life on things that have no lasting meaning and value. But he cannot do anything about it now because he is terminally ill and dying. His last effort to change devastatingly fails as he attempts to mutter the word forgive. Does he wish to say forgive me because he knows that this entire tragedy is his fault? Sadly, there is nothing else Ivan Ilyich can do. Tolstoy reminds readers, however, that it is not too late to make their lives meaningful. And here is the winning essay in the 19 and over division. The title is A Second Glance, and it's preceded with verses from the letter of James. He is like a man who looks at his natural face in the mirror. For once he has looked at himself and gone away, he has immediately forgotten what kind of person he was. In The Death of Ivan Ilyich, Tolstoy creates an image-bound society, a people who determine the pleasant and proper is reflected in the appearance of life, which Tolstoy saw as not having any meaning at all. Ivan is a product of such a society. He is a worldly careerist whose valued properties mark the antithesis of the spiritual life that Tolstoy solely deemed worthwhile. Ivan catches a glimpse of Tolstoy's contempt for the pleasant and proper surface-lived life in one climatic episode. Ivan's brother-in-law, a robust fellow, is visiting the Ilyiches before the new year. His reaction to Ivan's gaunt, sickly appearance is horror and gaping disbelief. This sends Ivan straight to the mirror to confirm his grossly changed appearance. While Tolstoy reportedly could not resist looking at death, Ivan, up to this point, never bothered to even think about it. But seeing death for the first time, Ivan realized that he was a product of a society bound to the reflection, No longer did the motions of life, the appearance of pity for another, popularity through card games, importance through job status, or wealth seen through strategically placed garden plants matter. And so Tolstoy stares remorselessly through the orifices of the death mask of a man whose social and moral features have nothing whatsoever in common with his own, Ronald Blythe writes. Ivan is part of a society that is said to live in the unreflected perpetual present, where conversation and thought are unrelated. Spoken words are pleasant and proper because they are external in a world where the internal does not have a place. In the courtroom of such a society, conversation is one of the many motions of life, and geared to please the jury of one's peers. The shallowness that Tolstoy saw in this became evident to Ivan at the moment he looked at death in the mirror, the same moment he loathed and rebelled against the society he embraced for so long. Ivan learns that death is an uncomfortable reminder to the living that there is more to life than what can be seen, and ironically, the people he left behind are also dead, nothing more than empty shells that abandon the soul for something that looked better. For our video contest, we invited our readers to make and post a short film on YouTube. Not surprisingly, we only had one entry, and that's not really surprising because I think, as we can all see, this is not the kind of material that lends itself to a humorous little sketch on YouTube that we go to YouTube to find. But we were really fortunate that we have that a team of filmmakers did take up the challenge and produced what I think is a really extraordinary attempt to dramatic filming of this from the novel, and we're going to screen that now, and happy to give this this film its world premiere screening. We will announce the winners of our contest in the 18 and under division for the essay contest. In third place was Alex Anduz, a 10th grader at Tallwood High School. Second place was won by Andrew Kaur, an 11th grader at Oscar Smith High School. And our first place winner is Alex Gladu, a 10th grader at Tallwood High School. In the 19 and over division, our third place winner is Johnny Wexler, a psychology and organizational leadership student in the School of Undergraduate Studies. Second place is Deborah Mangum, is an MA Community Counseling student in the School of Psychology and Counseling. And our first place winner is Sarah Dolan, who is the Public Relations Coordinator and a Regent journalist and alumna from the class of 2008.
Look in the camera.
Okay. Oh, they didn't come? Okay. And now I'd like to ask the winners of our video contest, Jonathan Aye and Joshua Delavuk, who are cinema television undergraduates in the school, undergraduate students in the School of Communications and the Arts. Come, please. Maybe I didn't make it clear. Did any of our other of our winners here? Oh, please come down. This is my mistake.
I don't know which is which.
So please come down. Okay, this is for our filmmakers. So we'll get you. Like I say, we'll get you. Congratulations. And,
I remember you. Yeah.
okay, very good.
Oh, Deborah.
Just shake the hands.
I'm not sure if Harold announced it, but the first place winners receive $150 from the Big Read. So those of you who won first place awards, congratulations and wonderful job. Well, I'd like you to join me in welcoming now the founder and president and chancellor of Regent University. He's also the founder of Operation Blessing and Christian Broadcasting Network, and we're most proud, though, of Regent University. And he is here to congratulate the award winners and also to give thanks and praise for the success of this Big Read program. Dr. Robertson.
I had an amazing occurrence as I walked into this room tonight. There was a sweet little girl about this high who said, "Thank you so much for giving a job to my grandfather." I don't know if my grandchildren are thanking people for me or not, but in any event, her grandfather is one of our deans, and she said, "Do you suppose..." There he is. He said, you suppose if I worked hard when I got through my school, if I could come and I could be dean too?" Man, you're training them well. I mean, they're out there waylaying you in the hall. She's got to go a long way. I really appreciate what you all are doing. You know, a test was taken some years ago, and I remember it very vividly, when an attempt was made to determine what key characteristic of leadership that they could identify from a number of people who were leaders. What stood out among them? And guess what? It was vocabulary. That was the major factor in distinguishing those who were CEOs, leaders, presidents, and this, that, and the other, was their ability with words. Because if we cannot use vocabulary, we can't express ourselves properly, and if we can't express ourselves properly, we can't persuade other people to do what we want them to do. So the reading is the way to do it. Somebody asked Harry Truman what was his motto for success, and he said, "You ought to read at least one book of biography every week." When you begin to see the lives of people who have made an impact on this world and you get them up close and personal, that's what makes a difference. And of course, in this Big Read, I believe you were studying Tolstoy, one of the great authors of all time. And I'm just so, I'm so proud of Sarah and the work that she's done and these who have been awards. What do they have to do to get awards? Good. Were they good, the essays? No? One of the things I'm proud of doing, you know, a lot of people graduate from public institutions, they're illiterate. We get them from state schools that are illiterate. I don't know, I want to point my finger at the University of Virginia or something, but people come who can't read and write. And so one of the things that I put in years ago was a course in basic literacy, teaching them how to read. And we have a program here in a graduate school to make sure that people can express themselves appropriately. And if they can't, they go into a remedial class where we can help them, because if the state colleges they went to and have a bachelor degree from didn't train them how to express themselves, then they're crippled. So we wanted to make sure they had those skills. And so what you're doing here is wonderful. I appreciate what you're doing, and I hope these will be budding journalists and book writers. It's not all that hard to write books. I just finished my 19th, and so I have to read a bunch of them. I interview authors. They throw all these book companies. They want to get their books out, and so any way they can get on TV is fine. So I'm always confronted with authors, and they give me these books. You've got to read them, and you have to whip through these babies in a hurry and then act like you know what they said and when you interview them. But nevertheless, I've had a lot of experience reading them and writing them, and it is fun. And I think there's no greater opportunity than to get lost in a book. I think that's in my opinion, one of the most relaxing, wonderful ways to experience life is to find a good book. And when I read them, I don't ever stop, though. I mean, I don't know what the rest of you, but forget going to bed. I mean, I always said, aren't you ever coming to bed? Well, I haven't. I'm only halfway through, So anyhow, congratulations to all of you for what you're doing. This is a very important part of our work here at Regent. And I would like to pray for those who have won the awards and those who are doing the teaching and those who are part of this course. Father, in Jesus' name, we thank you for the opportunity to express ourselves, and we realize that as it said in the book of John, in the beginning, God expressed himself. And Jesus Christ was known as the Word of God. And we thank you, Lord, for the Word. We thank you for the printed Word. We thank you for the Scriptures. We thank you for those who've interpreted them. And we thank you for those who've written so eloquently, like Tolstoy and others, about the struggle that people have in their own lives and hearts as they seek to learn more about you. So, Lord, bless this program and bless each one who has won an award. Thank you for Sarah and her team and for all those who are participating. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robertson. Well, please join us for a reception featuring some yummy, authentic Russian chocolates. I will. And also, you can feel free to ask Professor Andy any burning questions you had that weren't answered. And as you exit, I would just ask any of our award winners to please come up to the front, and we're going to take a photograph. So we'll see you out. And we do have a violinist from the Virginia Symphony Orchestra who will be playing some delightful Russian music for us while we enjoy our chocolates. See you in a few minutes.